Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service here in Washington, D.C., and third, former Commissioner of the IRS, the Honorable Douglas Shulman. Thank you all for coming. Before we begin, I'd like you all to stand so I can swear you in, please. Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. As is our regular practice, we'll include your prepared statements for the record and ask each of you to summarize them in about 5 minutes. We'll start with you, Mr. George. And then after that, obviously, the committee will have a lot of questions. Mr. George.
Thank you, Chairman Baucus. Chairman Baucus, Ranking Member Hatch, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss our report concerning the Internal Revenue Service's treatment of groups that apply for tax-exempt status. Our audit was initiated based on concerns expressed that certain groups were being subjected to unfair treatment by the IRS. The report issued last week addresses 3 allegations. 1, that the IRS targeted specific groups applying for tax-exempt status. 2, that the IRS delayed the processing of these groups' applications. And 3, that the IRS requested unnecessary information from the groups it subjected to special scrutiny. Our review confirmed all of the allegations. Inappropriate criteria were used by the IRS to target for review Tea Party and other organizations based on their names and policy positions. The practice started in 2010 and continued to evolve until June 2011. The criteria which we obtained from a briefing held by the IRS's exempt organizations function in June of 2011 were the organization's names, including Tea Party, Patriots, or 912 Project, whether the organizations had policy positions involving government spending, government debt, or taxes. Third, did the organizations intend to provide education to the public by advocacy or lobbying to make America a quote-unquote better place to live? And lastly, were there statements in the case file criticizing how the country is being run? These criteria were inappropriate in that they did not focus on tax-exempt laws and Treasury regulations. For example, 501c3 organizations may not engage in political campaign intervention, which is defined as action taken on behalf of or against a particular candidate running for office. 501c4 organizations may engage in such activities so long as it is not their primary activity. IRS employees began selecting Tea Party and other organizations for review in early 2010. From May 2010 through May of 2012, a team of IRS specialists in Cincinnati, Ohio, referred to as the Determinations Unit, selected 298 cases for additional scrutiny. We found that the first time executives from Washington, D.C. became aware of the use of these criteria was June 2011, with some executives not becoming aware of the criteria until April or May 2012. These inappropriate criteria remained in effect for approximately 18 months. After learning of the criteria, the Director of Exempt Organizations changed them in July of 2011 to remove references to organization names and policy positions, only to have staff in Cincinnati change the criteria back again to target organizations with specific policy positions. The difference this time is that they did not include Tea Party or other named organizations. It took until May 2012 that the criteria were finally changed to be consistent with laws and regulations. The organizations selected for review for significant political campaign intervention experienced substantial delays in the processing of their applications. As of December 2012, the status for the 296 cases that we were able to review was 108 cases had been approved, 28 cases were withdrawn, and 160 cases were still open. It is noteworthy that 0 cases had been denied. Of the cases still open, some have been in process for over 3 years and crossed 2 election cycles without resolution. Of the 108 cases approved, 31 were Tea Party, 912, or Patriot organizations. Another troubling aspect we uncovered was the fact that the IRS requested unnecessary information for many political cases. 98 of 170 cases that received follow-up requests for information from the IRS had unnecessary questions. We found that staff at the determinations unit sent letters requesting this information with little or no supervisory review. The IRS later determined these questions were unneeded, but not until after media accounts and questions by members of Congress arose in March of 2012. An example of unnecessary information requested was the names of past and future donors. The IRS informed us that they subsequently destroyed the donor information received from applicants. In closing, the IRS demonstrated gross mismanagement in its operation of this program. The allegations were substantiated and raised troubling questions about whether the IRS has effective management oversight and control, at least in the exempt organizations function. Chairman Bacchus, Ranking Member Hatch, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present the findings of our audit.
Thank you, Mr. George. Mr. Miller, you're next.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Unfortunately, given time considerations, the IRS was unable to prepare written testimony. I would note that I have a very brief statement before I take questions. First and foremost, as acting commissioner, I want to apologize on behalf of the Internal Revenue Service for the mistakes that we made and the poor service we provided. The affected organizations and the American public deserve better. Partisanship, or even the perception of partisanship, has no place at the IRS. It cannot even appear to be a consideration in determining the tax exemption of an organization. I do not believe that partisanship motivated the people who engaged in the practices described in the Treasury Inspector General's report. I've reviewed the Treasury Inspector General's report, and I believe its conclusions are consistent with that. I think that what happened here was that foolish mistakes were made by people trying to be more efficient in their workload selection. The listing described in the report, while intolerable, was a mistake and not an act of partisanship. The agency is moving forward. It has learned its lesson. We have previously worked to correct issues in the processing of the cases described in the report and have implemented changes to make sure that this type of thing never happens again. Now that TIGDA has completed its fact-finding and issued its report, management will take appropriate action with respect to those responsible. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Sean. You might pull the microphone a little closer to you so we all hear. And make sure it's on too, that helps.
Chairman Bacchus, Ranking Member Hatch, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee to talk about the Inspector General's report. I was Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service from March 2008 till November 2012. And during that time, the agency was called upon to tackle a number of challenges. The agency played a key role in stimulus and recovery efforts during the economic downturn, aggressively addressed offshore tax evasion, and completed a major modernization of its core technology database. The agency also continued to deliver on its core mission of collecting the revenue to fund the government. The IRS is a major operation with more than 90,000 employees who work on issues ranging from processing individual tax returns to building complex technology, to ensuring compliance with businesses, to educating the public about tax law changes, to administering a very complex set of rules governing tax-exempt organizations. I have recently read the Treasury Inspector General's report. I was dismayed and I was saddened to read the Inspector General's conclusions that actions had been taken creating the appearance that the service was not acting as it should have. That is, as a non-political, non-partisan agency. The IRS serves a critical function for our nation. It collects the taxes necessary to run the government. Because of this important responsibility, the IRS must administer, and it must be perceived to administer, our tax laws fairly and impartially. Given the challenges that the agency faces, It does its job in an admirable way the great majority of the time. And the men and women of the IRS are hardworking, honest public servants. While the Inspector General's report did not indicate that there was any political motivation involved, the actions outlined in the report have justifiably led to questions about the fairness of the approach taken here. The effect has been bad for the agency and bad for the American taxpayer. I'm happy to answer any questions.